Welcome again, friends. My name is Wendy Cooler, and I'm serving as the convener of the Friends Incubator for Public Ministry. We're an educational project that is held under the fiscal sponsorship of my meeting, Sandy Spring Friends Meeting, and Baltimore Yearly Meeting. Um, in addition to being under the fiscal sponsorship of meeting, we're a kind of collaboration with an advisory board from all over the Quaker world, including someone from the UK in Woodbrook.
Mm.
Um, our work, we're about a year old at this point. Our work really centers on the formation of public ministry in the Quaker context. And through that, the support of the ministry of all that Quakers very radically believe in. It is our contention that all ministry, including public ministry, really is held and held accountable and supported in the context of the local worshiping community. Um, so this evening's presentation with Melinda is an outgrowth of that work in that we believe that religious education is a form of public ministry that takes you out of meeting for worship quite often as a practitioner and into the lives of children and sometimes outside of the meeting entirely, as Melinda has experienced in her role at Faith and Play. I want to point your attention to a couple of things that we're up to at the incubator before I introduce Melinda. One is our events list, which I can't seem to paste. I will work on that. But on our website, we have a number of events in the month of April. This is our first one on the first day of the month. Next week, we're having three sets of speakers. We'll be in residence at Pendle Hill. We have a fellowship program, and our fellows will be there with their facilitators and teachers and me. And those events are public. They'll be hybrid. We'll be in person, but we'll be broadcasting those. And the other thing I wanted to tell you about is that we are building a book of testimonies called Constellation of Witness. We have a Kickstarter up right now to support our artist, Joey Hartman Dow, who does all of the art for the Friends Incubator. They're a fine artist that grew up Quaker in Philadelphia and currently live in New Orleans. And we're very happy to be one of their clients. It will be a beautifully illustrated, like every page illustrated collection of testimonies from people, including Melinda, who are engaged in public ministry work. And if you would like to contribute to this collection, you can find me at wendy@friendsincubator.org. And I'd be very happy to hear your ideas for submissions as we build this book. So, with that, I want to introduce my great friend, Melinda Wenner Bradley, who I adore. And I want to share something about Melinda before I just turn it over to her. Melinda is a switchboard operator of Quaker Religious Education Resources, a weaver of words and ideas, and a sower of stories. Her teaching ministry includes religious education, consultation, workshop facilitation, storytelling, and writing for Quaker publications. Classroom teaching for 20 years and a master's in education led to an interest in children's spiritual lives and support for families in faith communities, and a seminary degree in ministry and leadership. She encourages friends to shift away from scholastic models for religious formation and toward experiential, belonging focused ways of being with children and inviting them into lifelong spiritual community with all ages. Melinda co founded the Quaker Religious Education Collaborative and Faith and Play Stories and is a licensed godly play trainer who keeps learning at every opportunity. She has led workshops and programs for friends across the US and in Peru, England, Kenya, and New Zealand. Most of all, she is the parent of three wonderful young adults who are not allowed to call her this evening, who have been her most important teachers. Melinda is a member of Westchester Meeting in Philadelphia Yearly Meeting. So, Melinda, My dear, my darling, the title of this evening, An Emergent Quaker Theology of Childhood, Moving Beyond Ambivalence and Admiration, is a little sassy. It's a little spicy. Can you unpack the sass of the title that you chose for this evening's presentation?
I would be glad to. Thanks, Wendy. And I recognized I was really playing with words. And to begin, I just want to lift up that I'm playing with some ideas here and what I'm sharing this evening that have been taking shape for me over some time. And I actually have no answers. So I'm going to include a lot of questions for all of us and what I share. I probably included too many questions in what I shared with Wendy ahead of time because then I was like, oh no, I have to answer all these for everyone. So you can't hold me to not answering all of them. But maybe you have some of the same questions, and maybe you have different ones. I'd love to hear them. Part of my hope for this evening is to call friends in as partners and collaborators in thinking about this work. And naming my own context, I come to the questions and the few things I have to say. This sharing from my own childhood in a Quaker home and growing up in a Quaker meeting, my experiences as both a teacher and a parent, and this ministry that I have felt called to more recently in the last 15 or so years, around religious education and the nurture of children's spiritual lives in Quaker communities. So I'm not going to do every word by word, but I will say the emergent part here is that these ideas, of course, are still developing, continuing revelation. I'm working toward a wider sharing, and I'm grateful to Wendy and the Friends Incubator for this space to explore some of these ideas together. I'm also grateful to all of you for showing up this evening in this space with your curiosity and I assume your deep care for children and young people in our Quaker community. There is always more wisdom in the circle, um, or in the squares, as it were, this evening, than with any one person, and I am always eager to keep listening and learning alongside other friends. So emergent means it's still growing, it's still happening. And I want to come back to the phrase theology of childhood, and Quaker theology of childhood. But it feels important here at the start, because Wendy lifted up the sassiness to explain why I chose the words ambivalence and admiration. And I actually want to back up another step and just say that, before we dive into this, I recognize there are so many good things happening in meetings and churches with the welcome and inclusion of children and youth. My very favorite thing to do is to gather with friends for a faith and play, godly play training. There are some faces here who have been part of that, those communities, those circles. And so, that always gives me heart. And I am, what's my favorite part of it? Meeting the people who are committing their time and energy and care to the work. So nothing is monolith, and my message in this time together is not about what we're doing wrong. I know so many friends hold deep care for children and young people and engage with them in community in ways that are authentic and curious and respectful. So, what do I mean by naming ambivalence and an ambivalence that we need to move beyond? Um, I went and looked these words up to make sure I really knew what they meant before I used them. And ambivalence is defined as having mixed feelings or contradictory ideas about something or someone. And in my experience, there can be ambivalence in a Quaker community, by which I mean either a meeting or a friend's church, about children, particularly children's participation in worship. We often hear the concern that we want more children, that we want more families with children in our communities. And so here's my first question of the night. Are we prepared for the possibility of needed change that would make their participation and presence more possible? And this is something we'll return to. So, admiration is a word that seems like a good thing. It's defined as a feeling of respect and approval, an object of esteem. But if we unpack that definition, and I'm going to use a lens here of godly play and the work and the reading I've done as part of godly play. When we unpack it, centering how we view children and their spiritual lives, it becomes problematic. We know that children need to be loved and to be in relationship with other people. And I want to suggest that love is not the same thing as admiration. Love is nurturing and it's unconditional. Love lets children know that we see them, that we acknowledge and respect their feelings, their ideas, their experiences. And admiration can be conditional. It can come with approval from an adult, and that can be withheld. It can require more and more energy to maintain. And that phrase, object of esteem, to me, that feels othering, that the child is admired as there's an objectification in that admiration. So, love and admiration, not the same thing. So, why would I be concerned about ambivalence and admiration as part of a childhood experience in Quaker community? If this is what we are experiencing and what children and young people are experiencing, then to use a very erudite word, I think we're stuck. I think there's a stuckness in that. The concern that we hear and maybe hold ourselves about the decline of Quaker community, this is part of that, and it doesn't need to be this way. And I want to describe the stuckness of ambivalence and admiration a little more, but I also want to talk about what is possible and plausible when we center love and relationships in ways that are about mutuality and reciprocity. So, what happens when we name in ways that are truthful and loving that faith communities can and often do center adult comfort, conditional welcome, and systems that treat children like interruptions? And I suspect people know what I'm talking about, have experienced it or seen it, experienced it as a child, known it as adult. I'm culpable of having probably done some of this myself. Um, but this is the ambivalence that I feel like I've encountered. We talk about welcome for children, and yet more questions. Here we go. How are spaces in the community prepared for them? Prepared for them with intention? How does community life and service to one another include them? And are they in worship with the community? And again, there are meeting communities that are preparing spaces that are including children in their service and witness, and where children are in worship. I had the delight of visiting my youngest child at the University of Vermont last weekend and going to Burlington meeting where he goes every week, makes my mother's heart so happy. And we started with like 10 or more children in the room. In fact, they had to keep bringing in more chairs. And my son was like, that was so disruptive. I was like, that was joyful. We had to make more room for more people. And the children then went out, and I'm bragging on Burlington meeting here for a moment. All the New England people can feel a little chuffed. Um, the children went out and then they came back and invited us. They had been preparing for weeks. They had created a festival of homemade wares. I got a great like shrinky dink, what's it called? Like a pin that says ice hurts. And I met the person who made it, Hazel. And they were raising money for migrant justice. So those children, and they were sung out of worship. So we're going to come back to my thoughts about children in worship, but that was like, I know you may be part of a meeting where there are great things that are answering those questions in positive ways. But a question that we might keep coming back to, because right, things cycle in meeting communities, we might keep coming back to in the life of a meeting, and not just for children, is the question of where are we good at doing visibility, but not inclusion, voice, and belonging? And I'm gonna say that one more time. Where are we good at visibility, but we're not matching that or meeting it with inclusion, voice, and belonging? And I want to lift up for us the idea that we need to begin by naming the powers in our communities. And I know that's an uncomfortable word, powers. Quakers don't want to believe that any of us have any power. But naming, by that I mean naming whether we're giving power to things that are creating the stuckness. So are we giving power to that's the way we've always done it? Or giving power to what we call tradition, or without examining what that means for us, or anxiety about noise that's disguised as reverence, or to an unwillingness to disrupt the comfort of some for the inclusion of all. And once we can name and unmask what the power behind the stuckness is, when we can tell the truth about how and why children may be kept at a distance, then we can engage with it. Then we can move into the kind of discernment that has the possibility of transformation. Walter Winks reminded us that transformation begins with the willingness to see. And so I wonder what becomes possible and unstuck when we widen our vision together. So there you go. Ambivalence and admiration, and a little bit of why.
Yeah, thank you, Melinda. I'm wondering if we can unpack that a little bit more. I was hearing some sense that maybe there's something in our testimonies or in our practices that is really in tension with the experiences of children
Mhm.
and what it means to be a child. And I wonder if you want to explore a little more about the stuckness and the relationship it might have between our faith and practice, our traditions and our testimonies.
Mhm, mhm. I sometimes wonder if we aren't somewhat in tension with general sociology and how we view community and children. And one societal attitude about children is really revealing. It's the phrase just playing. Have you ever heard someone say they're just playing? I mean, I probably said, oh, they're just playing. And there's a really great quote from Rebecca Nye, who's someone who's written about children's spirituality, children's spiritual lives. This is the quote. She says, "We need to take a generous, trusting attitude to what may constitute prayerful activity for children. It may look as if a child is just doodling, or idly rolling balls of Play-Doh, or gazing blankly out the window. But in these moments, God and the child may be in deep communion." I use the word trust all the time in Godly Play, Faith, and Play training, talking about trust and the importance of trust in relationships. Um, and I was that kid who stared out the window at meeting and probably looked like I was just staring at the rhododendron bush, but I know there was a sense of God's presence for me in that. Um, so when we dismiss children's, I'm going to come around to the testimonies here. When we dismiss children's approach to spiritual life, what that looks like for them, and it's inherently messy with children. They don't compartmentalize it. Um, I tell the story of my son William, the Burlington meeting goer. He was like 6, and he turned to me on a family walk, and he goes, "Hey, mommy, sometimes I wonder why I was born and what I'm supposed to be doing with my life while I'm here, and what will it be like when I die?" And I was like, about, and then I couldn't get anything out in response, and he was like, "I'm gonna go be a centaur now, bye," and ran away. So children don't compartmentalize their spiritual lives. Their questions are everywhere. They're all over for them. And when we dismiss that approach, when we are contributing to that stuckness. And their approach, I think it's really important. I'll say this a couple times probably tonight. Their approach includes story and play, which are the native languages of childhood. I'm also sure that people have heard people say, They're just playing, and this idea of, it disappears in a way, the importance of what the child is engaged with, and marginalizes the work of childhood, which is play. So we might ask, where in community life do people feel they must disappear to belong? Um, and what is the experience of this for children? Um, I really am getting to testimonies, trust me. We've been celebrating Margaret Fell's 1666 pamphlet lately, Women Speaking Justified. There's the wonderful new translation into modern English by Paul Anderson, who presented here with the Friends Incubator a couple weeks ago. And it occurred to me at some point recently, I wonder what it would be like to research and write children's participation, justified, proved, and allowed by the scriptures. And somebody's actually kind of beat me to it. There is an author named Amy Lindemann Allen who has a book called The Gifts They Bring: How Children in the Gospels Shape Inclusive Ministry. And I can put that in the chat later. The chapters in the book are named for gifts of participation. That's the structure, gifts of participation that children share in intergenerational communities and that we see examples of in the Gospels. For example, I love this example. She offers another view on the story of the feeding of the multitudes found in the Synoptic Gospels. That the child in John, the Gospel of John, the child with the 5 barley loaves and 2 fish, that child was there to hear Jesus that day and had packed a lunch. She makes the case that the child is more than a metaphor or a narrative vehicle, suggesting that, and this is a quote, Jesus explicitly counted children among the group of disciples who followed him from place to place in his traveling ministry. It changes the way we hear that story. The child had packed a lunch and had come to hear Jesus teach. So, coming back to the testimonies, I hope that we will explore with children both how the testimonies are rooted in spiritual life and how children have gifts of the Spirit to share with the community as we all seek to let our lives speak. One of the faith and play stories that some friends here will know is called Love's Way. I've been telling it a lot lately. And I mean, I visit friends' schools and tell faith and play stories, and I've told Love's Way at a number of schools. Um, and it describes the testimonies as being grounded in love, as ways that we do our best to follow because we're listening for spirit, we're listening to the light within, that each of them are love's way. And you touch the center of the story and the flame that is the light in the stories. Um, One time I pulled out the light during a story, this was years ago, and I'd been telling stories at a school and I pulled out my felt flame and child in the circle goes, "Oh, not the light again." I was like, "Yes, friend, the light again. It's gonna be here a lot. Get ready." So this part of the story, this idea of the testimonies are about us being grounded in spiritual life and in love and in that listening. It recognizes the parts of spiritual life that really weave together for all of us at any age: belief and practice, identity and community. And so I wonder, and I hope this makes sense to other people. I wonder what is at the intersection of childhood questions or struggles with the existential issues that frame all of our lives. So my son named half of them in his pre-Centaur conversation with me: aloneness, meaning and purpose, freedom, and death. So, what is at the intersection of those big existential issues and how we talk about seeking to live these ways that the testimonies describe? And this is where I think if we don't open ourselves and really listen to children and their experience of spiritual life, their way of approaching it, we're going to stay stuck. But I wonder about that intersection and what is there at the intersection of, say, aloneness and community, or meaning and purpose and integrity. in terms of living our life so that our beliefs and our actions are one. Big questions, meaning and purpose. What am I here and meant to do? And then how does integrity intersect with that? Death and peace. Death does not feel peaceful in many ways with the fear that exists around it. Freedom and equality, freedom and simplicity. We could keep playing word matches, but I wonder about the internal spiritual life and those big questions, and how do our testimonies give us ways to explore them, and where is there tension there? And whether there are tensions at those intersections for children or any of us in how we experience the world and what our Quaker faith asks us to practice. Or between our beliefs and how we live our truth? I think the answer is yes, that there is tension there for all of us, and that children also experience questions and tension around that intersection. So, not surprising hearing from me that addressing and exploring these tensions and exploring concerns is where I really believe stories and play are so important. Um, they are how children experiment with language and meaning and come close to big questions about belief and identity. And in terms of addressing stuckness, we all need stories, all of us, all ages. Elise Boulding said, storytelling bridges the generational gaps in ideology. Storytelling helps connect us across generations. And a last thought on this is that godly play talks about following Jesus's theology of blessing. If you're familiar with any of those stories, when we put our hand on each of the days in the creation story, various things and actions that we do are about a theology of blessing. And I would add the importance of accompaniment from our Quaker tradition alongside that. Um, when we create an intentional, safe, prepared space where children can play their way into learning spiritual language that will help them talk about those deep questions of life, they will experience God's love. And all the better if they're doing that in community with adults where there is reciprocity and mutuality and listening to one another across stories and generations.
Thank you, Melinda. Um, in your comments just now, I feel like I was hearing you kind of, um, the waters of Melinda were lapping up on the shore of belonging and care. These themes of what it means to really be a beloved member of a community.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and you were saying that, another person has written at least one of the books that you would like to write from a completely different tradition. And I'm wondering, and I feel confident that you do have thoughts about how Quakers might create a culture of real belonging and care for our children and for all of us.
Mhm.
And I also wonder about the way we worship, and how worship might be a part of our belonging and care for each other.
Hmm. 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 Thanks, Wendy. I think some of what is plausible for us as friends and our future is about kind of recovering the truth of where we want to be or who we want to be, which means looking at our past, and considering what there is there to remember or re-remember that still speaks to us today. And for me, a vital part of this is worship. I'm glad you named that. I believe this is where it begins with belonging, and that belonging is the beginning, and that belonging and knowing that you belong in the experience of worship is really vital to our future as friends, as communities. And I'll tell a little story that some friends have probably heard. There was a Sunday morning, I was at meeting for worship at Pendle Hill in the barn. I cannot remember what I was there for. Doesn't matter, but there were people who had children with them. And a group of children returned to where the adults were sitting for like the last few minutes of worship. Um, and on that morning, as the children were settling into the space with us, some of them were sitting with each other, and others had found their adult people. I heard a message rise in me. I heard it so clearly. And the message was, now we're all here. And it wasn't like a head count. It was spirit. It was spirit saying, we weren't all here before, but now we are. This is the body, all of us, all ages together. Now we're all here. And that message startled me and it held me in my seat. And I kept kind of repeating it to myself over and over until worship ended. And then it left the room with me and it took residence somewhere deep inside me. It became a prayer that rises in me every time I'm in worship and the children return or they're there before they leave, that now we're all here. Um, we have this is no one's fault what I'm about to say, but we all have a role in it in some way, myself included, that we have siloed children away from our worship. And I think it is to our detriment. Um, Welcoming children in worship is good, not just for children, but for all of us. I've come to see that it is not only a practical consideration for membership development, but it is a moral and spiritual imperative. Um, I'm participating this year in an ecumenical program through Auburn Theological Seminary. It's the Wink Fellowship, named for Walter and June Winks. And it is for ministry folks and religious educators who seek to center children in worship and community life. Um, like I did need to hear more before I knew I wanted in. And at a recent retreat, the question we explored was, have you wondered how much more vibrant and transformative worship could be if children were fully included instead of being sent out? In my head, I'm like, yes, I wondered it. Um, so, quoting the Reverend Dr. Emma Jordan Simpson, who led the retreat, she said, centering children is not the magic bullet, it is the way forward. So, I think one question about practices, you asked about, how do we do this? What are practices? I think one question about practices, I'm not going to give answers because this is just, again, full of questions for all of us. But I do want to ask this. How do adults get ready to cross the threshold into spaces where children are included? We often think about how to prepare children to cross the threshold into a worship space or sometimes into their children's program space. Crossing the threshold is language of the godly play and faith and play use. That's about getting ready and transition. So I'm turning that around and asking, how do adults get ready to cross the threshold into spaces where children are being included? What do we need? What work do we need to do? Because welcome and inclusion and belonging are an active commitment on our part, individually, as a community. And I love the question, what if the table was set for everyone? How does that change how we approach it? And I bet everyone could invoke for themselves a table, a space, a meal where they have been walking up to see what's there for them and how that table is set, so to speak, changes your experience of it. So, what if meeting was a prepared space ready to receive everyone of all ages? And I think we need to reject the claim of scarcity that exists too often, that if we feed everyone, we won't have enough. That if we include children, adults will have less of what they need. It's loaves and fishes again, but it requires us to come prepared. Like that child with his picnic lunch in the Gospel of John, we need to come prepared, and we really can feed everyone. And this perspective is also not about placing the needs of children above the needs of adults. There should be room for everyone in worship. It's about mutuality and reciprocity and equity. Intergenerational spaces are marked by those three things: mutuality, reciprocity, and equity. So, another question for us then is, what are the practical and pastoral changes needed for broader acknowledgement of the spiritual needs and gifts of children in faith communities? It's a big question. I'll say it again. What are the practical and pastoral changes needed for a broader acknowledgement of the spiritual needs and gifts of children in faith communities? Um, I have a lot more to say about children in worship. Um, Spoiler alert, that was what I wrote my capstone project on in seminary. Um, and that's another talk for another time, or another conversation for another time. And if things have rise for people, and when we do the Q&A part, glad to get into that more.
Thank you, Melinda. I have one more question to kind of take us out until the time at which we're going to take a bio break and then move on to questions and answers and conversation without the camera on or without the video recording on anyway. Um, and it's again, I think, about the title of this evening's talk. One of the provocative things about your title is you use the word theology. Um, and theology for some Quakers is a taboo word. I am a practical theologian, and I remember several years ago giving a presentation in which I said something offhanded about Quaker theology, and someone was so upset by that that they had to unmute themselves and interrupt the presentation in order to inform me that Quakers don't have theology. So I have a degree in it, but we don't have it. And this is a really common, I think, misconception about us that there is no theology here. And so just by choosing that word, you are poking the bear a little bit, Melinda. And I wonder, I have some notes here from what you were just saying. I'm wondering if you can say more about what an emergent Quaker theology of childhood would look like in our context. Um, and I wonder what that calls Quaker community toward if we are seeking a theology of childhood.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So I feel like I must start with a disclaimer that it's emergent. So it's an emergent Quaker theology of childhood. So it's a work in progress. I suspect the spiral curriculum of learning will continue, and what I have to share will change over time. Possibly because of teachers that are here among us now and teachers who are children in circles that I'm in. But um, yeah, the words that I used were meant to be provocative. You know, ambivalence, calling out ambivalence and admiration, and the idea of a Quaker theology of childhood. How a faith community talks about children is not neutral. And it reveals what we believe about God, as well as about authority and tradition and whose voice counts. Um, so that's the first thing to say is I think how we talk about children as well as um, our actions, which are so often well-meaning, it speaks. Our lives speak. And there's a quote from Rufus Jones that I always include it in my spirituality of the child presentation that's part of a godly play training. Um, and that's a good place to begin. Rufus Jones, and also it's Rufus Jones. You all can't argue with me. It's Rufus Jones. Um, so he said, something of God comes into our world with every child that is born. There is here with the newborn child a divine spark, a light within. I just I didn't plan to share this, but it rises from sharing his quote. This past week, two Mondays ago, I was at a friend's school. I've been going to this school for 4 years, sharing stories once a month. So the children know me pretty well, especially the older grades. They're really good wanderers. And I told a story that is an adaptation of both the godly play baptism story, which obviously we don't use, and also a story in young children in worship, another curriculum. And it's a really simple story. I light a candle in the middle of a bowl of sand. They were fascinated with my bowl of sand. We had to discuss how fire works. A couple classes actually made me light a candle again and stick it in the sand to show them the science of sand putting out flames. But I light that, and then I have taper candles. I have one for every child. I buy a whole bunch of them, and I light a candle for each child, and um, they say their name, and then I say their name and say, "This is your light, the light that you were born with inside you, that goes everywhere you go." And I put it in the sand, and we make a big circle of all of these candles. And um, they recently lost a teacher who was an older person, but someone passed away. And every single class asked me if we could light a candle for her as well. And we did. And then they sometimes would be like, "You too, you need a candle." So I'd have to do me and put my candle in. And then we talked at the end, the way we do in Godly Play, about changing the light. And I snuffed them all, but said the light is changed. It's going everywhere now, the way the light goes with you everywhere you go. But they're wondering about this story was just wonderful as it always is. And one child said, "Where were the people?" Well, this is a younger class. "Where were the people in the story? Like, where were my wooden figures?" And I didn't even get a response out. Another child said, "We're the people in the story. It was us. We were the people in the story." Um, and they had a lot to say about the light inside them that no one gave me, not the light again. Um, they had a lot that they were holding around the fact that there is this light and that it is part of them. So a Quaker theology of childhood might include to be continued, to be continued with continuing revelation. But here are some things I thought of. A Quaker theology of childhood might include. First, the light, that there is that of God in the child, and it is the center of their spiritual life from their beginning. We don't need to give children spiritual lives or put them inside them. They come to us, as Rufus Jones more eloquently said, with that light within them. They bring more of it into the world. A child has a profound intuitive knowing of whether we want to call it God or the divine or spirit or something greater than them. Rebecca Nye also writes about relational consciousness, that a child's spiritual life is about relational consciousness, knowing self, knowing others, knowing the world, and then knowing whatever it is that is the language of what is beyond and bigger, the divine God, spirit. So, a second thing is a child has a profound intuitive knowing of that already. I think as friends, we could agree on that. A child's native languages are story and play. But almost more importantly, play is a spiritual practice for all ages. So many of us have lost a connection to the idea of play, play being something that is voluntary, done for its own self. We might lose track of time. It's about process, not product. And there are a lot of things that have been written about how play is nurtures our resilience and our spirit. So play is a spiritual practice for all ages. I would love to see us really reclaim that. Fourth thing, children have gifts of spirit to bring to a faith community. You don't need to turn 18 to figure out your gifts of spirit. Children have gifts to share with the community. Um, that's one where we have to be mindful of what's appropriate, age appropriate. Again, love, not admiration with children. Um, but another story from another school, I was telling the Faith and Play story gifts. And, there's the person in that story who, they're my favorite person, the person who doesn't know what their gifts are yet. The other people in the story know the gift of welcome, the gift of service, the gift of questions. A lot of kids feel like they've got that one. Um, the gift of music, and you can change these. But the one that you should always keep is the person who doesn't know what their gift is. And there was a child in a kindergarten group who said, I don't know what my gift is, was very concerned. And another child in the same group said, I think I know what my gift is. I think it's to help other people find their gifts. So they had a moment of taking care of each other, but those children recognized themselves. They saw themselves in the story, which is part of why we tell stories. And they affirmed they have gifts of spirit to share. Another one would be that I got three more, that friends value childhood for its own personhood, not as preparation for adulthood. To value childhood for its own personhood. I heard someone give a talk in the last month or so that he said, children are human beings, not human becomings. I thought that was great. So valuing childhood for its own personhood. Children also need accompaniment. I mean, we all do. But if we're talking about a theology of childhood, the idea that children, as well as adults, children need accompaniment. They need someone to bear witness to their growing faith in a caring community. And that those relationships, again, center mutuality and reciprocity. Um, I think the idea of accompaniment with children is just really important. It's not always about teaching, but it's about walking alongside them. There's a quote from Sophia Cavalletti about we can take children to the threshold, but we can't cross it with them. Our work is to walk next to them. Their knowing of God is their own, but we can accompany them to that place. And this one might be a little controversial. Warning. Uh, Children's capacity for silence and stillness and solitude, they do have the capacity for those things, is nurtured in community. It may not look the same as adult silence, stillness, and solitude, but their capacity for that is nurtured when we're accompanying them and when we're acknowledging their gifts and their light in community. So for now, there's my Quaker theology of childhood. But I have questions, of course. And so here are some questions for all of us. If Quaker theology is grounded in that of God in everyone, how are we seeking to experience and nurture that still small voice in children? Where are we creating spaces for that experience of listening for them? Um, if our worship allows for a direct, unmediated experience of spirit, God, the divine, um, do children have intentional, prepared spaces for that experience? I think worship could be one, but we often have spaces that are for religious education or community for children. So, how are those intentional, prepared spaces for children to also be listening? And if continuing revelation means that spiritual truth is still being revealed, where are we listening for children's truth? Where are we creating spaces to listen for truth that children may have to share with us? And Wendy, I have a list of things I yearn for, but I think you wanted to take a quick break, and maybe we can like end with that.
Mm, thank you, Melinda. You and I have been talking for a long time. I think we've known each other for more than 10 years now. Um, and listening to you this evening, I feel like I'm having new thoughts despite the length of our relationship with each other. And one of the things that you're making me think about is how when we really truly see a person
Mhm.
and make space for them, we are also making space for everyone. That what is good for people with disabilities
Mhm.
is good for others. What is good for trans people is good for everyone. Um, what is good for me is good for others. When we make the world a more accessible space
Mhm.
or set of spaces, we are doing the hard work
Mhm.
of community and really seeing each other and making it possible for us to be with each other in the way we intend.
Mhm.
And I wasn't expecting to feel at the end of this conversation. I'm so I so embrace that I'm an adult. The other day I had cake for dinner, for instance, and I was just told all my friends, it's good to be an adult. I can have two pieces of cake for dinner. Um, and I want to say I'm very much not a child. And I think it's really important to recognize that, adults are not the same as children. And the things that you named that children need are things that I yearn for, things that I
Mhm.
need. The permission and place and space to play, the respect, the accommodation for who I truly am, the welcoming. This is what we need. This is what I need.
Mhm. Mhm. Well, I sometimes also say that what adults really need is good children's religious education.
Mhm.
Like takes care of it, nurtures all of us. It occurs to me, Wendy, that you're going to turn off the recording. Should I share my yearnings before we
I would
transition?
love to hear your yearnings, and then we can take a bio break and open it up for conversation. I see we already have some questions in the
That's
chat.
awesome. Awesome. So here are my yearnings. I'm so excited that I was given a space to say these things. So here we go. My hope is to encourage friends in meetings to explore the intersection of community and change and faithfulness through experiments with worship and the lenses of mutuality, reciprocity, and equity. I yearn for us to talk about children and youth and care for their development and participation in Quaker community with the same urgency that we have when we talk about climate justice and other kinds of witness. There is love for what we're protecting now and for the future in that witness for the earth. And our care for children is another form of being generational change agents who are building something that will outlast us. So I want to come alongside those climate justice warriors, but I want us to care about our children and youth with that same kind of urgency. I yearn for a concern about younger generations to be woven across all of our other interests and concerns and ministries, including when we're talking about Quaker theology, if it's really a thing. So, not as a standalone episode about children or a standalone issue on children, but integrated into the kinds of topics that we talk about on our podcasts and in our journals. So when we write about Quakers in the Bible or Quakers and Bible study, where is the discussion about how to explore these stories with children? When we talk about outreach and developing Quaker identity, are we considering the experience of children? When we share about our work for peace and justice and witness in the world, how do we include both teaching about the past and inviting participation today with children and young people? And I'll lift up here, it's my plug for religious education, that religious education actually holds all of this, exploring sacred texts, understanding the past to live in the present and the future, experiential learning about our faith and practice. It is both teaching and accompaniment, and it is content and spiritual nurture. So, this isn't my topic here, but I also yearn for there to be greater support for the friends who are called to religious education. I know some of you here are those people, because make no mistake, it is public ministry, and it has been since the disciples became apostles.
Well, I feel that last line, Melinda. I'm just like, oh, my heart is on fire right now. In a good way, not from eating too much cake for dinner. It's, thank you so much, Melinda. I'm going to turn off the recording now. Thank you, friends that are watching this recording. Please be in touch with me if you have an idea for a future conversation. If you have any questions about the Friends Incubator for Public Ministry, you can contact me at Windy, WINDY, at friendsincubator.org. Thank you.